Friday night of Memorial Day weekend, we get a call for a missing person at 115 Central Park West. The building is known as the Majestic. It's a very affluent building.
The Majestic had every amenity known to man, doormen, concierge, everything that you need to live in that stratosphere.
We respond to the location. We're met by Mr. Abdallah, who says his daughter, Daphne Abdallah, hasn't returned home.
Lee Furman starts to interview the father, to find out what was going on. And the doorman says, well, she's not missing. She's back in the utility room at the back of the lobby.
The doorman points us, shows us where it is. When Mr. Abdallah opens the door, we see a young girl, young boy in a bathtub in water, washing each other off. This is Daphne Abdallah and her boyfriend, Chris. In my head, I'm thinking, hey, they're fooling around. They're in a bathtub.
As awkward as that scene must have been, he noticed that there was some blood.
So he asked about the blood, and Daphne said, I cut my head rollerblading. It wasn't a lot of blood that we would say, hey, something's going on, something happened. It could have been a fall. I noticed Chris also had a cut over his eyebrow, but again, small, nothing significant. I could tell she was mad that we were there. She yelled at her father, why do you call the cops? I hate the pigs, I hate 5-0. And then Daphne yells out, get the fuck out, close the door. At that point, Mr. Abdallah said, I'm okay now, everything's good, I'll take them upstairs. So we left.
Before Lee Furman gets too far away from the Majestic, he hears a job come over the radio about somebody reporting a dead body in Central Park, and it's coming from the Majestic.
So I came over the radio and said, we were just there, we'll respond. And we returned to the Majestic. It ended up being Daphne Abdallah called the police. So she invites us inside. I go in, and she said, there's a body in the lake. A body in the lake, come on, really? What's the chances of that?
This was an evil crime, so over the top. Who would destroy someone so brutally, and why?
Every single case takes a little piece out of your soul.
You cannot do this job unless you really care.
You want to find out the truth. That's what detectives do.
I've always liked the peek behind the curtain. What really happened?
It's so important for a family to know who murdered their relative. That's my job.
In New York City, the NYPD. This is it.
Central Park is essential to the heart of New York City.
It's not just like a park you would associate with something with a great lawn and maybe a couple of ball fields and some playground area. It's way more than that.
We all live in concrete. We walk on concrete. We live up in the air, far from nature. So Central Park for a New Yorker is more than a backyard, it's an oasis. But all New Yorkers share Central Park, not just the good people, but bad people too. Central Park was very dangerous in the 70s and 80s. I never would go there at night. That's when we were having 2,500 homicides a year. A lot of them happened in Central Park.
By the late 1990s, the city was objectively getting safer. Every single indicator of crime, public safety was moving in the right direction.
when the city turned around and things became better, Central Park became better as well. However, whenever there was a crime there, it was all hands on deck.
Somebody gets a hangnail in Central Park, it's like, oh my God, everybody has to go and figure out what's going on there. So when somebody gets murdered, it's a big deal.
On May 23rd, 1997, I'm just starting my 5th year as an assistant DA, and I just started riding along with a more senior homicide assistant, which means that I'm being trained to investigate and prosecute homicides. And somewhere between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., I remember being awakened to the sound of the beeper going off. And because I had just moved into my illegal sublet, I did not have a phone line hooked up. So I had to go out onto the street, found a payphone, and I dialed the number on the beeper. And the person on the other end said, "There's some kind of brouhaha in Central Park." I thought that was the understatement of the year.
It's early morning. We've been notified by Night Watch dispatcher, and he says we have a body floating in Central Park Lake. I was the commanding officer of Manhattan Detective Night Watch. Our job was to establish the crime scene and then hand off to the catching detective who has the case. I got to the scene right on the west side of Central Park, right next to Strawberry Fields. We had a trail of blood, maybe 40, 50 feet, going to the gazebo. And we followed the blood trail, and I walk up to the lake, and there in the lake is a human body floating head up. When I first saw the crime scene, I couldn't help but feel this incredible sense of dissonance. That lake is in the center of this beautiful park, and yet what I was seeing at this crime scene was among the most brutal I've ever seen.
I went to the death scene to investigate the body in its setting, in its circumstances. Most crime scenes are confined to one location. In this case, we had the path leading into the park where there were blood drops, the area by the gazebo where the pool of blood was, and the body in the lake. And I looked at the edge of the water, just bobbing and floating among the reeds. It was just this pale man, what was left of a man. And I stepped a little closer and saw that his abdomen was ripped open and his intestines were floating in the water.
I've seen hundreds of bodies in my tenure in NYPD. This was the only body I ever saw with a floating intestine. It remained with me.
His wrist was hacked, his right hand hanging, almost detached. These multiple slashing, gouging stab wounds. You think overkill. What overkill means is passion, anger, rage.
Every murder is horrible, and every homicide crime scene is upsetting and emotional and hard to digest. But there's definitely variation, and homicides that are committed with knives tend to be the most brutal. At this point in my career, this was the second homicide crime scene I'd ever been to. To be exposed to something like that so fast, this was definitely a baptism of fire.
I was a third-grade detective investigator working at Manhattan North Homicide Squad, and I've been there for almost 4 years. Friday, May 23rd, 1997, I was not scheduled to work a day tour. I was coming in early to go to a court appearance downtown, and I get to the office at about 8 o'clock in the morning, And the lieutenant looks at me and says, look, there's a murder in the park, and you got to call downtown and cancel your court case and come with us.
I was told that somebody from Manhattan North Homicide was being assigned. And then Rob Mooney shows up. And the second he starts talking, now I know who's in charge. This guy is 6'5". He's got an enormous head. He's got 70s rock star kind of hair with this 70s style mustache. Looks like one of the long lost members of the Allman Brothers Band. And he always wore a Grateful Dead pin on his lapel.
Big Deadhead. Loves the Grateful Dead.
I've probably seen the Dead close to 300 times in my life. The diversity in that community gave me a serious advantage in not being judgmental about people. You don't judge a book by its cover. And in this case, it turned out to be true.
The victim, he didn't have a wallet, but there were some papers that we'd found. And there was a name, Michael McMorrow.
We learned that Michael was 44 years old. He lived in Manhattan with his mom, and he worked in a real estate company.
Today, mystery surrounds a gruesome murder of a man in New York Central Park.
McMorrow was slashed more than 50 times, his throat cut.
You could actually hear the cavalry of the media. Because, you know, in New York City, everything that happens in Central Park is top billing. When I see the size of the victim, the guy was over 6 feet. He looked like he was over 200 pounds. So for someone to be able to go out there and mutilate, dismember someone like that, there's more to the picture. I couldn't really understand it.
The condition of the victim's body and the amount of violence that attended to all these injuries was a clear indication that this was not a random act of violence. This was not a robbery that went bad. And so the mystery then becomes the mechanism of what happened.
So I'm inside the apartment. Now it's 2 o'clock in the morning. After Chris left, that's when Daphne called us. And she said, I was afraid of Chris, but I didn't want to say anything while he was around. So Daphne said she was in the park with her boyfriend, Chris. They were hanging out. They went for a walk, and Chris went crazy. He killed a guy. And while Daphne's talking, Mr. Abdullah just walks away and I'm looking at him, he walks away like, this is your daughter, and you're not saying anything, not stopping her from saying this. Like, again, maybe he's just used to this. So in my mind, I'm thinking she's bullshitting me. You know, you're 15 years old, you're young. Maybe she got in trouble, so now she wants to cause more problems for her father. So I'm not asking her questions, she's just divulging this information. Then she went into, I tried to give him CPR, that she tried to help instead of being part of it. She's saying, Chris did this, Chris did that, nothing I did. Until while Chris was trying to get rid of his body, she told him, Chris, you should try to gut him and sink him, try to cover it up. To be around something like that should be shocking to you, but her demeanor was just like normal, just very relaxed.
Lee Furman had some patrol cops from the Central Park precinct go to the park who in fact discovered the body floating in the lake. And so that changed the tenor of everything that was going on in the apartment.
After Lee Furman responded to the 911 call in Daphne's apartment, We had clearly reason to believe that Christopher was directly involved in this. So later that morning, acting on that information, detectives went to Christopher Vasquez's apartment and they placed him under arrest for the murder of Michael McMorrow.
He had to go to central booking, and the lieutenant at the time says to me, "Fix your tie, you gotta walk him out to the car." When I first looked at Chris Vasquez, I was kind of a little bit shocked because he looked like this little kid. You know, I knew he was 15, but he looked like he was 12. And he clearly had injuries on the side of his face and on his hands. That impression only added to my concern about how this actually occurred, because it didn't seem likely to me that he was going to be the sole responsible person for all of the mayhem that occurred at this scene.
What we really didn't know was what we had in Daphne. So the way that she presented herself was as a witness, but most witnesses to incredibly violent crimes don't volunteer that they suggested that it would be a good idea to gut the victim in order to sink his body in the lake. So Daphne Abdallah is arrested at 12:30 in the afternoon on May 23rd. And we went over to try to get a statement from her. We wanted to talk to her. And the dad, on her behalf, refused to speak to us. The first time I saw Daphne Abdallah, she was a kid, she was little. You know, in my brain, I'm having a hard time connecting this person to this crime.
We were informed that they had both asked for lawyers, so there was no opportunity to have an interrogation with them. So that's a huge loss. Anytime that you don't get that opportunity, that's a problem. We had two 15-year-olds and Michael, who's 30 years older than both of them. So how in the world did these people come together? How did this become a murder?
Detectives looked at Daphne's family and learned that her father was a well-to-do businessman, her mother a French model. They had adopted her as a baby, and she lived a life of incredible privilege. She had everything.
In the late 80s, many moms would bring their children to the park. We'd all play in strawberry fields. And then fast forward about 13 years, and one day we hear that somebody has been arrested for murder. And it was a girl named Daphne. And as we learned more about, our friends all realized that that little girl named Daphne was one of the kids who played almost every afternoon with all of our kids. When I heard about the murder, I got so obsessed with it and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was then that I wrote a proposal to have a book done on it. In writing this book, I wanted to talk to anybody and everybody who knew Daphne, who knew Christopher. Daphne went to Columbia Grammar when she started school. And at first she fit in pretty well. But as the years went on, she became more belligerent. And finally, in 8th grade, she was asked to leave Columbia Grammar, which is not usual for a private school in the city.
Daphne engaged in a lot of self-destructive behavior, i.e. booze and drugs. And Daphne's family paid for her to go to really expensive rehab, I think twice before this happened.
Daphne started high school at Loyola after she was asked to leave Columbia Grammar because she was tough, she was brash, she was arrogant. Her attitude became worse and worse. She just refused to follow any rules, any curfew, any decent behavior.
The other suspect in the killing is 15-year-old Christopher Vasquez. He is described as a former altar boy and a Boy Scout who grew up in a 5-story walk-up in Spanish Harlem.
I learned that Chris Vasquez was from a pretty good family. He was an altar boy. He lived right next to the church on 97th Street.
He was such a good boy, very helpful, very obedient.
He lived over in East Harlem, nothing fancy.
A very nice boy, very well dressed. He didn't hang out, he wasn't a troublemaker. Everybody's devastated by this, we can't believe it.
Christopher's parents were separated, and his mother was raising him, and she put him in a private school, which is expensive. So his parents worked hard to give him a good life.
And he was a good kid, but he was very introverted and would get picked on a lot at school because of his size and his introverted behavior.
Chris was someone the kids teased. They called him a herb, slang for a loser, a weakling.
I don't know why he did it. He did it because he's a herb. Yeah, he is a real herb, yo.
Both Christopher and Daphne were excellent rollerbladers, and they would go to the park most afternoons, and they met each other there. Neither Daphne nor Christopher had many friends. Daphne because she was so obnoxious, and Christopher because he was so withdrawn. When they met up, they struck up a little bit of friendship, and then they started hanging out. They hung out together for about 2 or 3 months before the murder.
2 15-year-old children from private schools, and that made an absolute circus of coverage.
A shocking crime that has led to the arrest of 2 teenagers for allegedly stabbing a real estate agent and dumping the body in a
One
pond.
of them, a millionaire's daughter.
When I first learned what had happened to my uncle, I was in shock. Especially since for me and for my sister, we spent a good amount of time with my uncle in Central Park. That was a special place for all of us. And we knew that it was a special place for him. So for him to have lost his life so tragically in this place that was so special, it was devastating.
It was very hard to see my mother and the griefs that she was in. And the fact that they lived together, I think the loss was felt by her more than anybody. And I think she still felt like she should have been his protector. We grew up on the west side of Manhattan, block from Central Park. Michael was extremely likable, made a lot of friends, had a lot of friends.
I didn't call him Michael. I never referred to him as Mike. I called him Irish. That was his nickname in the neighborhood. He was quick to laugh, and that's basically what you saw of Irish, was he was laughing most of the time, cracking jokes.
He was just a guy. Just a guy. So why would someone want to destroy him like this? There's the mystery.
The 2 teenagers accused in the brutal Central Park stabbing of a Manhattan real estate agent say they're innocent.
Christopher Vasquez and Vasquez's 15-year-old girlfriend face an arraignment later today.
The arrest is not the end of the story. It's really the beginning of the story. It's a pretty confusing situation. We don't feel like we know exactly what happened at this point in time.
Defendant is charged 125, 25, first degree.
This defendant, along with Chris, referring to the co-defendant, attempted to conceal the identity of the victim.
15-year-olds Daphne Abdullah and her boyfriend, Christopher Vasquez, entered not guilty pleas during an arraignment yesterday.
Under New York state law, from the second that someone is arraigned, you have 144 hours to file an indictment. And if you don't file an indictment within that statutory time period, then the defendant must be released from custody. So we had to assess pretty quickly whether we felt we had enough evidence to establish reasonable cause that would get us to an indictment. Now the clock starts.
This became a wide-ranging investigation. This requires multiple crime scene teams to go and collect evidence from each of these locations. And then, of course, there was the team of detectives interviewing the family members, the witnesses. They're waiting for evidence to come in, because that's how you build your case.
Because of things that Lee Furman observed at Daphne's apartment, there was evidence that needed to be collected. Blood evidence on the clothing, blood on her rollerblades, and there was blood on the watch that she was wearing.
When NYPD gathers evidence, they don't fool around. It's not just a picture of some blood in a bathtub. You didn't take the whole bathtub because it's got blood of the perpetrators, maybe blood of the victims.
We searched Daphne's bedroom. In one of her drawers, I found Michael McMorrow's wallet with his ID and some money. That's just another piece of evidence that places her there with Michael, with Chris at the scene.
The problem is that, horrific as this crime scene was, merely being present while the crime was committed is not a crime. It may be morally and ethically indefensible, but it's not a crime. You have to prove the elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, every element.
We learned that from Michael McMorrow's family about Michael's regular behavior and some of the people that he would spend time with in the park.
Michael had a group of people he knew in the park. And after work, you go over there with, a six-pack or something, and he had his own, drinking buddies.
Michael struggled with alcohol. He was just a regular guy with regular problems.
Irish was trying to change himself, going to AA. The one that Irish went to was at the Y off Central Park West, and that's where he met Daphne.
Investigation was progressing as it should have. People were being interviewed that we discovered were present prior to the murder in the park. We discovered on the day of Michael McMorrow's murder, Daphne and Chris agreed now to be boyfriend and girlfriend. They go rollerblading, and she gets into all kinds of trouble. She's picking fights with older men in the park. She's doing all kinds of crazy things and allegedly making a statement to one of them that I'm going to kill somebody tonight. Prior to the murder, Daphne and Chris, they'd been drinking, and they ran into this group of people by Strawberry Fields, one of which was Michael McMorrow. Now, Chris is being the lapdog. He's just following along. Daphne is this much more experienced, shall we say, child of the same age.
She was the genie in the bottle. When Christopher found that bottle and opened that cork and she popped out, she controlled everything with him.
During the search at Chris Vasquez's apartment, there was blood on his clothing, and they recovered a knife. We don't know at that point whether or not it's the knife. So we had to get DNA testing done.
Mr. McMorrow was taken down for autopsy. He had a blood alcohol level of 0.31 at autopsy, which is about, more than 3 times the legal limit. Would that make him impaired? Probably yes. But he did have the ability to walk from Strawberry Fields down to the lake on his own 2 feet. So we're trying to establish what happened. There was bruising to the back of his legs. There was a pattern bruise. The destruction of his face indicated this was very personal, very rageful attack. On one side of his chest were maybe 8 or 9 or 10 stab wounds, all grouped together, that indicated he wasn't moving. Now you can see the man standing and having his face hacked and his hands hacked as he fought for his life. Then he goes down, and now his attacker stands over him and brutally hacks at him, stabs him multiple times over and over and over.
The biggest question I think that I had in my mind about what actually occurred, because this is a big guy, how did he end up down on the ground? Despite his level of intoxication, that it allowed skinny little Chris Vasquez to inflict all that damage. And the answer is, Chris didn't do it by himself. At least that's the supposition.
did finally learn what they did to the body, that angered me. And I don't care if they're 15, there should be some justice here.
My sister was 15 years old. I was 17 years old. We couldn't fathom how somebody our age could do something like this.
Daphne Abdella will remain behind bars until at least Wednesday. That's when another court date is scheduled. At that time, some grand jury action must have been taken, or the 15-year-old goes free.
The DNA analysis came in. His pocket knife had a mixture of blood on the blade and in the hilt, and that mixture was his blood and Michael McMorrow's blood.
It's the murder weapon. That's like a rock-crushing piece of evidence.
It was hard to wrap your mind around the fact that they were capable of that sort of extreme violence, but at the same time, we knew that they were. We knew that they've done this. We felt at that point that on the totality of the information that we had at that moment, that we had enough probable cause to charge both of them. The key piece of evidence for Chris was the knife. For Daphne, it was her statements. Clearly, she had placed herself in an active role in terms of trying to dispose of the body. We presented that evidence to the grand jury. The grand jury found it persuasive. They returned indictments for murder 2 against both of them. Within the first few days of this investigation, we found out who the 2 defendants had retained to represent them. Christopher Vasquez retained a man named Arnold Chris, a former assistant DA, clearly a formidable adversary. Daphne and her family retained Ben Brafman. Ben is one of the most prominent defense attorneys in New York and probably in the country.
He's represented everybody from mafiosa to Wall Street people. Ben had a portfolio that was diverse and usually with good results for him and his clients.
It was, kind of a stark reminder of how much was at stake here and how difficult this was going to be.
Some detectives might get a little bit intimidated by the presence of somebody like Ben Brafman. My opinion was, you have a law degree and you're dressed way nicer than I am, but we both put our pants on the same way this morning, and I'm ready if you're ready. So let's do it.
At this point, I have more questions than answers. Who was Mr. McMorrow, and why was he in the park drinking with children?
The media was shaping the narrative to paint Irish as a pervert. They're painting an untruthful image of Michael.
Why he apparently liked to drink into the night in the park with a mostly young crowd remains unclear. What is clear is that it cost him his life.
The most obvious explanation, if you see that a 44-year-old guy is drinking with 2 15-year-olds at night in Central Park, it's not that much of a leap to try to paint that picture.
McMorrow later met up with the 2 teens near the lake and may have made a pass at Abdella, allegedly sending her boyfriend Vasquez into a knife-wielding rage.
I think the speculation was hurtful to my grandmother and to my other family members because they were not real. We wanted to make sure that he was remembered respectfully and with dignity, because that's what he deserved.
There wasn't one thing that we learned about him that would have ever indicated that he would have ever done anything bad to anybody. He was, in fact, a kind person that was good to everybody that he met, to a fault. And in this particular instance, to describe him as being in the wrong place at the wrong time is absolutely right on the money.
The case against Chris was always stronger because of the knife. That was the single best piece of evidence we had in the case. We knew that that knife was the murder weapon. We felt that we were going to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Christopher was the knife wielder. We felt less confident about the quantum of proof for Daphne. While there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that clearly placed her at the crime scene, it requires the jury to take a little bit of a leap. It was a more difficult case than the case against Christopher. And then we got a pretty big surprise.
Mr. Brofman reached out to the DA's office as Daphne's lawyer and said, I've been interviewing my client and she would like to come in under Queen for a day.
Ben's rationale for this was that, hey, I think you guys got this wrong. She's really a witness here. She's not a defendant. Let me bring her in on a Queen for a day. That's an agreement in which the defense attorney can bring in his client and she can speak essentially freely.
Anything that you say cannot be used against you unless you testify in court and testify differently from what you've talked about here. So we brought her down to the DA's office. Daphne explained that night, she and Vasquez just happened to skate into this group of people that Michael would spend his evenings with who were drinking in the park. Shortly after, a cop on a scooter comes along and kind of disperses them, and so they all scatter in different directions. Daphne and Chris had the beer, so Michael followed the beer. And they went down to the little gazebo at the side of the lake. And that's where they sat drinking the rest of the beer. And at some point, Daphne and Chris decide that they're going to go skinny dipping in the lake. And when they come out, they're both freezing cold. So her explanation was that Michael sees that she's shivering. He puts his arm around her to try to warm her up, and Chris snapped. Because he thought that Michael was trying to make advances toward Daphne. He pulled out his knife, and then he started stabbing him.
She was saying, Christopher did it. He did everything. I'm a witness.
If this were true, she in fact is an eyewitness to a murder. Her indictment would likely have been dismissed, and that would have been the end of it for her. But I wasn't satisfied. Daphne was born practically thinking that she's superior to the rest of the world and that she's the most important person in any room that she would go into. And so she, I'm sure, thought that she was going to be smarter and be able to talk, because that's what they all do. They all think they're going to be able to talk their way out of it. And there's nothing that we like better. You keep talking, go right ahead. So I wanted to keep her on a string. I said there's physical evidence to corroborate what she said. And so then I said, well, I wonder if it would be okay if you guys would let us talk to her a few more times. I just want to clear up one or two things. Brofman was like, yeah, it's not a problem, because he thought this was a done deal. We did the follow-up interviews with her. He sent some junior associate from his office.
Rob's got something about him, it's almost fatherly. He's trustworthy, and people talk to him. When Rob Mooney talked to Daphne Abdallah, they built a rapport. He's brilliant at that.
I asked her, well, I have a question. I'm a little concerned about these bruises, and I took a picture out of the file that clearly showed this delineation and these rounded bruises on the back of his leg. And I said, what do you think these are? And so she got a little bit coy for a moment and was like, she's turning the picture around and looking at it. And she's being hesitant about it. And this guy actually reached out and tapped her on the shoulder and said, it's okay, you can tell him. And I'm thinking, well, thanks, pal. You're really helping me out here. So then I reach in the box and I take the rollerblade out of the box and I say, does this help jar your thought about this at all? So then she began to demonstrate part of her true behavior. And said, well, I thought he was going to hurt my friend, and so I kicked him. I go, okay, I understand that, but explain it to me. Well, I kicked him, and then, and he fell down, and then Chris jumped on him, was stabbing him some more, and I was like, okay. And then the lawyer went, okay, we're done.
She could no longer deny that she had any involvement. She assaulted Michael McMorrow. She kicked Michael McMorrow. She rendered him helpless. And now we have the proof. Perpetrator, not a witness, a killer.
We knew from the totality of the circumstances that she had to have helped Chris. And now for the first time, she's telling us. Shortly after that came out, we worked out a plea deal with Daphne Abdallah.
Tonight, a teenager charged with a particularly vicious Central Park stabbing has cut a deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. 16-year-old Daphne Abdallah apologized for her role in last year's murder and mutilation of Michael McMorrow. The plea deal does not require her to testify against her former boyfriend, Christopher Vasquez. He is charged with the actual stabbing.
Daphne was going to plead guilty, and she was going to take the maximum sentence for the charge, but she would not be testifying in court against Chris Vasquez.
We worked a lot with the DA's office, and it basically said this is the best we could get because we had proof against him. We had a pretty solid case, but her was very late. And if we took it to court, we're not sure we could have gotten any kind of conviction.
I also want to request that
in March of 1998, Daphne comes to court and she pleads guilty to a crime called manslaughter in the first degree. And manslaughter in the first degree is different from murder in the second degree, which is what she was originally charged with, because it doesn't require an intent to kill. What she pled guilty to was an intent to cause serious physical injury to Michael McMorrow. She pled guilty to manslaughter in the first degree. She allocuted in open court as to what she did that made her guilty of that crime, and she accepted a sentence of 3 to 9 years. November 1998, we're starting this trial. It was my first experience putting Rob on the stand, and Rob came to court. He was wearing a sport jacket, and he had a Grateful Dead pin in his lapel. And me being the young, uptight assistant DA said, Rob, that's inappropriate. You need to take that Grateful Dead pin off.
I was like, not happening.
And I said, please take it off. You don't do that in a court. You don't wear a skull with a lightning bolt through it on the stand.
I go, well, that's tough tarts. I'm not taking the pin off.
And Rob said, you have two choices here. I can either testify with the pin, or I cannot testify with the pin. He said, but either way, this story ends with me wearing that pin. And I thought about it for a second, and I said, how soon can you go on? The defense that was put forward was 3 people went down to the lake, 2 people came back, and neither one of them is talking. And so you just don't know what the hell happened down at the lake. Right? Because if you're not sure who was actually doing the cutting, the fighting, then you've got to have a reasonable doubt about this young man's guilt.
There's always concern that when people point the finger at each other, that this is going to result in a stalemate, and maybe the jury is not going to be convinced either way.
The defense did put the blame on Daphne, that she may well have been responsible for this, but I think the overall strategy was, we just don't know. And if you don't know, then you've got to acquit my client. In every case, there's a moment when the jury is able to visualize the person sitting in front of them doing the thing that he's accused of doing. I just had a hard time believing that all 12 of those jurors were going to be able to see Chris Vasquez committing that horrific crime.
When the jury went out to deliberate, we'd already been waiting nearly a year and a half or so for justice. Our family was understandably nervous. The longer it went on, the more it seemed like they had doubts about Christopher's guilt.
They were out, I believe, for 2 days, and they came back not guilty for murder 2 and guilty for manslaughter 1. Essentially, the exact same conviction and sentence as Daphne Abdallah. It felt a little like a compromise to me.
The jury was crying, because they were looking at Irish's family. It hurt the McMorrows, because they knew how much he suffered, and they didn't think they got justice.
I was very angry with that verdict. 38 stab wounds is not manslaughter.
I think that the jury didn't think that a kid that young should bear the mark of murderer for the rest of his life. I'm a big believer in following the law, but the law is complicated because humans are involved, and when humans are involved, emotions are involved.
Most of the cases that fascinate us are mysteries. Who did this thing? In this case, that's not it at all. We know who did it. But why call it a folie à deux, where the two of them combine their insanity to form one killing machine? Or just kicks? Why? That's the kind of thing that drives you crazy.
There's no way to know exactly what happened there because there's 3 people there and one's dead. And that's what happens. That's why I say when people go, oh, you solved that case. Nah, that's a bad word. Solve indicates that you actually know what happened. And a lot of the time you don't. You certainly can suppose what happened. You can look at what some of the evidence will lead you to think is the logical conclusion. But without that narration, there's no way.
The so-called baby-faced killers of Central Park are out of prison tonight after nearly 7 years. Abdallah, now 21, was released Friday. Her former boyfriend, 22-year-old Vasquez, was released this morning. As part of their parole, the two are barred from seeing one another.
Yeah, my brother's life was worth a lot more than 6 years in prison.
I don't feel like justice was done. I know it's the system and that's the law and they were kids and that's what happens. But it just doesn't feel fair. Not fair at all.
Years later, Daphne, when she was out on parole, violated her parole.
She was in a halfway house and assaulted one of the other residents at that house.
And actually went back and served the full term, 9 years. Chris got out after 6 years. I'm not aware of him ever doing anything to reoffend in any way in all the years since then. It was a really difficult experience on both a personal and professional level. You know, it was an unusual case, emotional case. Those feelings linger. One of the best things that came out of that case was the fact that I got to know Rob Mooney. And I didn't know it at the time, but we were just getting warmed up.
He has shifted to another world. He is no longer with us. He is elsewhere. I do not know where he is, but in any case, he is no longer there. The third day of the trial, already very tested by the behavior of their son, Mr. and Mrs. Brunel must now express themselves. It is Michel, the father, who will begin. Michel Brunel gets up to go to the bar. For the first time, he does not take his cane. He says he will make it. We offer him a seat, he refuses. He says it will go. I had not prepared anything at all, of course. I did the course again of our two children, of our two sons, until the moment when I had no more. And I stopped. He collapses, because for him it is really too hard, because it is not a son that he lost, it is still painful. And above all, it is something unusual to find one of his children behind bars. It is a terrible position for parents. I think there is no worse trial than this trial. And when Irene Brunel arrives at the bar, the court holds its breath. The old lady only has one goal, to convince the court that her eldest son Dominique has premeditated his gesture to get more and more money. And here's what she declares. I raised two boys. Of the two, I have no one left because of the two sons. I had an angel and a demon. A demon who never had enough money to pay me. And his look, his attitude, it was strong, it was violent. And I felt all the distress that a mother could have by saying to herself, it's my son, it's me who put him in the world, it's my dear. In Saint-Marne, just 1 hour from Paris, Maincy is a municipality with nearly 2,000 inhabitants. It's really a very small village with a slum in the middle. It's really typical of Saint-Marne, which can seem surprising when you are 4 kilometers from Melun. It's a village that has kept its residential soul, which is typical and relatively traditional. In any case, known for its quietude. It is in the heart of this village that Marie Varnereau has always lived. At 17, the teenager fully enjoys life with her best friends Sylvain and Clemence, both met on the benches of the school. We were sitting next to each other in French class. And we immediately laughed at lame jokes, which we laugh at when we are 12 years old. And from there we started a great friendship. Marie is a loyal friend, very, very sincere. Sometimes too sincere. Marie is someone, for me, deeply kind. She has a big smile, with a gap between the teeth. But she has such a communicative smile. If she laughs, everyone laughs. It's really her who makes the jokes all the time, who takes your phone and hides it. It's a little ray of sunshine. And at the same time, I think she's a lonely person, really deep down. Marie lives with her mother, Anita. But she never met her father. Marie was born from a brief sentimental relationship. Her mother, Anita, was with Marie's father for a few months. They didn't even live together. They met at their workplace. Marie grew up without her father. Her father says he tried to see her, he tried to meet her. But her mother, Anita, prevented him. Anita, on the contrary, says that she would have liked her daughter to meet her father, but that her father would have disappeared. It is therefore only Anita Varnereau who raises her daughter. But on a daily basis, she can also count on her own mother, who lives not far from here, and who often helps her with Marie. I think that indeed she takes her role as a mother to heart, since it is she who will raise her daughter. I know that Marie has always lived with her mother, that she is very close to her grandmother, who lives close to her. But for 5 years, the mother of the family has been less present for her daughter. And for good reason. She met a man and spends a lot of time with him. Anita Varnereau lets her daughter live in their apartment, all alone, while she lives with her companion. Marine's mother comes very regularly, daily, to vacuum, put food in the fridge and take it, for example, to school or I don't know where. She is there, apparently, every day to bring the basic products, the food. she is also the one who honors the bills, who pays the rent. The absence of her mother is an omen for Marie. The girls take the opportunity to regularly invite her friends over. We came over quite often, and we always had a good time. It was always a pleasure to come with her. We meet in the apartment, we eat chocolate, and we listen to Michael Jackson. But at the same time, there is still this family situation that makes us wonder about what is happening in her life. In September 2013, Marie makes a radical decision. She decides not to go to high school anymore and to continue her studies by correspondence. As a student, the young girl then puts everything into practice to obtain her baccalaureate. It's something she took very seriously. We saw her several times, really, with her books on the table, rereading files, etc. I know that she is still trying to hang on to her studies and to aim for a diploma so that she can be more stable in life later on. But her correspondence classes worry her mother. She fears to see Marie give up in the course of the year. She is desperate when she discovers that her daughter is no longer going to high school. She gave up her studies very early, I think, in 6th grade, really very, very early. Anita is someone who has no diploma. She lives from a small job. Finally, right to left, she is going to do housework in residences around her house. So she says to herself that she doesn't want to see her daughter repeat the same mistake. And I think it's a real subject of discord between them. Studies are not the only sources of dispute between the mother and the daughter. Anita also reproaches the teenager for being too late. There are tensions on the way of life. I mean, the fact that Marie Varnot lives in shifts. She sleeps during the day, she lives at night. We will learn that she goes out a lot. So I don't think it's to please her mother. Yes, the nights with Marie, it was quite frequent. And when she doesn't go out, Marie spends the night chatting on social networks. It happens to her to send us messages at night, but like us, we sleep, we don't answer. We see when she was connected or not for the last time. It's true that I saw her spend a lot of time, let's say very late, on the internet. You could spend whole nights chatting with X or Y, everything and nothing. It wasn't very interesting. This behavior annoys Anita, who clearly makes her daughter understand. And the disputes multiply. It was a relationship between a rebellious teenager and a mother who wants to keep her rebellious teenager. They weren't physically violent relationships, but the flow went up quite quickly. I think she still loves her mother a lot. And no, I think they sometimes have a tense relationship, but not more than that. Despite all the love she carries, Marie and Anita can no longer understand each other. The mother of Femi does not know yet, but soon she will no longer have the opportunity to reconcile with her daughter. It is 3 days before Marie's 18th birthday, February 17th, 2014, that their life will change. Like every day, Anita went to see her mother, who lives a few hundred meters from Marie's apartment in Mainsea. When all of a sudden, her phone rings. She picks up her phone and a voice will tell her, "We killed your daughter because she contaminated them." At that moment, Anita starts screaming and says to her mother, "Come quickly, they hurt Marie." And so the two women rush to go to Marie's house, which is not far away. Anita goes directly to check if what she was told on the phone is true. Her grandmother tries to follow as she can. And when the mother of Femi enters the teenager's house, it is a scene of horror that awaits her. Her daughter's door is open. The apartment is made up of a ground floor and a floor. Marie's room is on the floor. Anita will go up to the floor and she will discover Marie's body, lifeless, on her bed. Marie has her head wrapped in an earring. Pillows also cover her face. She throws herself on her daughter's body. She gets tired of it. She shakes it. She cries. But it is not she who calls for help with her cell phone. It is the grandmother who will leave the house and go to the cafe across the street to call for help. Police officers from the police station in Mellon, accompanied by the rescuers, arrive immediately at the scene. They can only see the death of the 17-year-old girl. And immediately, they judge this suspicious death. The parquet stops right away and says, "Well, listen, we're going to call right away," and sees the Versailles Criminal Brigade. Police Commander Stephanie Ducatel remembers perfectly the moment when she was warned of the drama. In the middle of the afternoon, we were called by the representative of the parquet of the Melun High Court. Seeing the least mysterious nature of Marie's death, the parquet decided to seize the criminal brigade of my service. The particularity, perhaps from the start, is still the youth of the victim. Marie Warnerot, when she dies, she is not yet 18 years old. So it is true that we are not so used to seeing victims so young. The investigators of the Versailles Criminal Brigade leave immediately for Maincy. When we get there, we decide, you do this, you do that. And then we define the roles. Some people go to audition people, the witnesses, the person who discovers the body. And others, it was my case, to start the investigations inside the apartment. And as soon as they arrive, the police note an important first element. The first thing is that no door is broken. The front door that leads to the floor is not to be broken. And the door of Marie's apartment, the victim's, is not broken either. While the mother of the victim, shocked, waits for information, the investigators go to the floor of the apartment. And so there, indeed, I see for the first time that Marie Warnerot's body is lying, just in a little panty, on her bed. While waiting for the conclusions of the forensic doctor, who examines the victim's body, the police inspect the rest of the apartment. In the living room, objects that touch the floor, there are a lot of things that are scattered on the table. I remember seeing a handbag, overturned, with things that really touch the floor. The other rooms, so kitchen, bathroom, toilet, are not disturbed at all. There is no sign of disorder. There does not seem to have been a particular fight. In February, the mother of the victim attends the investigations without saying anything. She is quite closed. She waits, sits on a chair, smoking cigarettes. It is in the kitchen that a first element catches the attention of the investigators. Compressed, crushed residues on the sink. The judicial police notice traces of powder. A side of a blanket that could suggest a drug-related suicide. The hypothesis of suicide can also be retained if we consider Marie's way of life, who lives in her bubble, addicted to social networks, but sometimes also a little fetal. They can suggest a slightly depressive temperament. But after the first observations made by the lawyer, the hypothesis of suicide collapses, and the doctor's conclusions are without appeal. The death of the teenager is of criminal origin. The legal doctor looks and notices around the lip and inside the lips, so in fact it is small hematomas inside the lips, also on the gums, and also notices traces at the level of the throat. We can assume that indeed, from the start, she was a priori strangled and/or suffocated with the headband around her head and the headbands on her head. The murder is now no longer a doubt. The call received by Anita Warnerow was therefore not a hoax. Anita Warnerow will directly speak to the investigators about the fact that she received this call, where the killer tells her, "I killed your daughter. We killed your daughter because she contaminated us." Anita then explains to the investigators that her daughter has been suffering from hepatitis B for several months. It is therefore quite plausible that she was able to transmit this virus to someone. So we can say, indeed, the message she received, Anita, is perhaps to say, "Your daughter contaminated me, in brackets, with hepatitis B, so I killed her." The first reflex of the colleagues is to say, "Well, very well, give us your phone. We will work on it to try to go back to the author of this call that you received." For us, it is very important. Because, here, taking up the trace and the origin of this call is very important. Desperate by the sudden death of her daughter, Anita Warnerow then commits a terrible malady. Before giving her phone back to her colleagues, she makes a false manipulation that empties all the content of her phone. Anita will explain, "Oh, but it's a false manipulation. I do it by reflex. I systematically erase my call log and my messages. So, the call log, for example, we don't have it. The texts, we don't have them. The erasure of Anita's phone data immediately complicates the investigations. And to go back to the author of the call, the mother's phone is sent to a specialized service. While the investigations in the victim's apartment are ending, Michael Reinhardt is surprised not to have found the teenager's phone. So that bothers us because we say to ourselves, the author of the crime took it. Why? And we don't find Marie's keyring either. It's not logical, all that. It's not logical. There is nothing logical. The day after the murder, on February 18th, 2014, Marie Warnero's body is autopsied. The investigation really begins. We expect a lot from the autopsy because we are a little bit in the expectation. According to the forensic doctor, the death of the young girl dates back to the day before, between 9 a.m. and noon. It has been formally determined that Marie died of strangulation. Even if there may have been a mixture of strangulation and suffocation with the ears and the head of the ear, the cause of her death is strangulation. And that's not all. The autopsy will also reveal that the murderer did everything so that the teenager could not get out alive. Marie took a lethal dose of an antibiotic, Zolpidem, and Red Cervelo, lawyer of the civil parties, which is a drug for sleeping. She took more than 10 times the therapeutic dose. So basically, before being strangled, Marie was drugged in sufficiently large quantities so that the dose of sleeping pills she took could put her in a very deep sleep, as if her aggressor had wanted to prevent her from moving and defending herself. The intake of drugs and sleeping pills directly explains the absence of struggle or really marks of screaming, of blows. If someone is going to try to strangle you or suffocate you, you are going to fight. You're going to have very, very strong marks. Marie did not defend herself at all. And we can imagine that when she was strangled, she was already in a very deep sleep, even a coma that prevented any reaction from her. The motive of the crime seemed to have found everything. But the conclusion of the legislator comes to question everything. For the doctor, it is impossible that Marie is contaminated by anyone. In fact, Marie's autopsy will reveal that Marie had no transmissible disease in any way. Since at the beginning the vocal message of this unidentified individual who speaks of a contamination, we realize that after with the autopsy, with the biological analysis, that in fact, no. She's not sick, actually. So we're a little lost. One thing is certain, the killer had calculated everything to go to the end of his Machiavellian plan. We go there in murder, that is to say that the murder was programmed. Since the fact of making him absorb sleeping pills before strangling him, it still supposes a certain intellectual construction of the murder. There was premeditation. Besides, we say that the person who killed Marie, it's horrible what we're going to say, but she wanted to finish her off. She wanted to be sure she was dead. So who could have done this to Marie Varneau? Why want to kill this teenager, a priori without history? Could she have hidden secrets that would explain such a murder? In Mainsey, the news of the death of the young girl is spreading. Clemence will always remember the moment when she realized that her best friend had just been killed. I received a message from a classmate. She called me and started her sentence very gently, saying, "I'm sorry, it's not up to me to tell you this, but Marie is dead. We found her at home." I learned of Marie's death from her best friend. At the Versailles police station, investigators now want to know as much as possible about Marie Varneau. Who is she? Who could want her, to the point of killing her? To answer these questions, her relatives are heard, and Anita is the first to be heard in the investigator's office. Marie, the first person who talks to us about her, is her mother. Obviously, she explains to us that she had Marie following a love affair that lasted very little time. The mother of a very experienced family then launches the police on a first track. According to her, Marie would have received threats. One of the first things she tells us is that Marie Varnero was a victim of blackmail because she had been photographed naked by a young man, so potentially a little friend, and that this young man threatened Marie to spread his photos on social media. And that maybe, suddenly, it would be perhaps the author of this blackmail who would be the author of the crime. He blackmailed Marie, this young man, by telling her, if you don't give me money, in fact, we'll say he blackmailed her by telling her, if you don't give me money regularly, I'm going to spread his photos on social media. Without ever revealing the identity of her master singer, Marie would have begged her mother to help her so that her photos would never be released. Anita tells us that she had been forced to give money to her daughter, to Vibiton, lawyer of the civil parties, to silence the master singers. And so Anita Varnero explains to us that since the 5 months before Marie's death, she could no longer pay her rent, because instead of paying her rent, she gave €200 a month to her daughter, so that her daughter would pay the master singer who threatened her to spread his photos. When asked about this possible blackmail, Marie's friends declared that they had only heard about it. There were photos of her turning around, that someone was making her sing. It's really very vague rumors. There are photos hanging around. We don't specify what kind of photos, but we probably do, because otherwise we wouldn't blackmail. I don't necessarily like my friend being blackmailed. It's pretty obvious. And if Marie Varnero's murder mobile was in this blackmail case, is it possible that her hitman is also her killer? I don't see who in his entourage would be able to go so far as to blackmail and extort money from him. In the absence of Marie's cell phone, investigations to go back to this master singer are difficult. The major problem in this case is that investigators who go through the victim's apartment to the end do not find her cell phone. The same cell phone that could speak, that could provide information about the last contact she had. So the victim's computer, as well as her phone records, are studied, but without success. Nothing will be found to support the thesis of this master singer. We will not find any traces of money transfers, which could have been done hand in hand, but we don't even have any traces of appointments or anything like that. Nothing in particular at this level. No traces of videos that could have come out afterwards, that could have been found on the internet or elsewhere. Nothing at all of that. The master singer's trail closes, but investigators put everything in place to go back to the teenager's murderer. We go to all the tracks, and we have to close, as we say in our jargon, all the doors. What we want to find is the door of truth, which will lead us to the author of the crime. But before that, there may be dozens of doors to open, close. As the investigation starts from scratch, it is the victim's mother, Anita, who will put the PJ on a new track. She will make a revelation to the police. This time, she suspects an ex-boyfriend of her daughter, a young man nicknamed Junior, who Marie would have seen shortly before the murder. She will say that her daughter didn't want her to spend the weekend, and that she could see someone, especially this boyfriend, and that it would potentially be the last person to have seen him. And Anita tells the police that she doesn't trust this Junior. She will say that he has a very bad influence, that it was someone who could have hurt him. So it's a young man who is from the Paris region, from 1993, it seems to me, who committed a small infraction, in short, of common law, and suddenly he is filed, in fact, in the national file of genetic imprints, so we find him quite easily. The young man is summoned to the PJ's premises. However, the police found traces at Marie's house, traces, a priori, recent, of his passage in the apartment. There were some elements of a male passage in Marie's room. Namely, a pair of underpants and condoms, obviously, still wrapped. And he recognizes us, his underwear. We introduce it to him, and he says, "Yes, it's mine." He is surprised. I must have forgotten where I came from, but... He says, but it dates from several months. The young man then explains that it was he who had decided to break up, and that Marie did not accept it. She would even, he says, have done everything to try to hold him back. Marie made her little friend believe that she was pregnant with him. Their relationship, it seems, was struggling, and it was certainly an imaginary pregnancy invented to try to hold back the young man. It's old as the world. She's trying to get her boyfriend back, asking him to get involved in a pregnancy that is actually totally imaginary. Marie had said that she was pregnant with Junior and that she didn't want him to leave her, but I think that acting like that, for her, it was a means of self-defense, because when you're used to having people around you and you start losing them for X reasons, you want to keep them, and sometimes you use means that are not entirely correct. So it is obvious that the hypothesis of the pregnancy that the young man would have wanted to hide could constitute the death of a mobile phone. Is it possible, in other words, that the young man went to Marie's to explain to her about this alleged pregnancy? Could a dispute have broken out between the two teenagers? The investigators are digging this trail. Their priority is to know where Junior was on the morning of the murder. The investigators will be informed by the telephone operators about the location of Junior's mobile phone. That is to say, where his mobile phone is located at the time of the crime. They will realize that it is located tens of kilometers from the crime scene at the time of the crime. Nothing brings us to a possible guilt. So he wasn't in Mainsea at the time of the murder. So a trail that closes again. The young man is completely blank. All the clues studied by the investigators collapse one after the other. But their hard work will eventually pay and reveal a most chilling scenario. The results of the DNA analysis carried out on Marie's body have just fallen. The police hope to find a clue there that will lead them to the teenager's killer. Is it possible that the killer left his genetic imprint on his victim? Which is perfectly understandable, because of course, Anita Varno, when she goes to her daughter's house to discover her dead daughter, she completely modifies the crime scene. She will say that she took her in her arms, that she strangled her, that she manipulated her to tempt her to give her life, and that the exchange of DNA could have occurred at that time. A strange detail still arouses the police. Anita Varno's DNA is even found under her daughter's nails. DNA and genetic experts say that a handful of hands is not enough to leave DNA. And that's super important for us, because we say to ourselves, the only way to mix our DNA is to fight, to defend ourselves. It raises questions. But it is not a decisive clue either. What will be more surprising, however, is the absence of any other DNA, really. These results are a thunderbolt in the investigation. Anita Varno is now the main suspect. And to dig this clue, the investigators will do everything to bring up the call that would have warned her of her daughter's murder. And that's why we're going to go further in telephony, because we feel, all the investigators in the group, we feel that this call will be the key to the case. We ask for the detailed billing of Anita Varno's telephone line for the day of the events, knowing that it will lead us to the identification of the caller, the one who called her to send her this message. And we see that there was indeed a suspicious call that corresponds to the call Anita Varno told us about. And we realize that, in fact, the message that Anita Varno received was sent, I think I remember, around 2 p.m. from a telephone booth in the German neighborhood of Melun. And we understand, by doing investigations, very quickly, that the call from this telephone booth was made with a telephone card bought in a tobacco shop. A call from a telephone booth and with a card. Not very common in the era of mobile phones and social networks. But it's still a valuable clue for the investigators. Obviously, we're trying to go back to the cat. This telephone card was bought on Monday, February 17, 2014, a little before 1 p.m. in a tobacco shop in Melun. And there, we start to feel something good. If we had found a tobacco shop in La Rochelle or Brest, we would have said, wow, this story is going to be complicated. However, we remain within the geographical perimeter that will interest us. We go to this tobacco shop, we contact the manager of this tobacco shop, who confirms to us that it was indeed he who sold the card. We know that the one who sold it is necessarily the one who called Anita. The bureaucrat is nevertheless unable to give the identity of the person who bought this prepaid card from him. We therefore ask the bureaucrat if there is a video surveillance of his establishment. And there he answers us, yes, which is already quite extraordinary. At that moment, the investigators will be able to see the face of the author of the crime. Who bought this prepaid card? Who announced the murder of Marie to his mother? We can see on the camera that it is Anita Varnaro. Who is in the tobacco? And who buys this prepaid card? And there, we make a stop on the image. It is indisputable. The video is of super good quality. We see her enter the bar. We see her buy a phone card and 2 packets of cigarettes. She's a big smoker. We see her pay in cash and then leave as she came. We all stop. There is silence and we look at each other and we understand what is happening. It's Anita. And there, in fact, everything starts. The puzzle is being put in place. The shock is immense for these policemen, however, healed. We are stunned to say to ourselves, wow, it's her mother. She is linked to the case. And no longer as a victim, but as an author. Whether it is an author, co-author, or accomplice. But then, how is it possible that Anita Varnaro made this phone call while being at her mother's house to receive it? She tells us that when she received the phone call, she was at her mother's house in Mansee. And in fact, we determined that when she receives the phone call informing her of her daughter's death, she is not in Mansee, contrary to what she says, but she is under the telephone cable of the telephone booths that make the call. And it was after having made these phone calls that Anita Varnaro took her car back to go to Mansee. Afterwards, she went to her mother's house where she made her believe that she was receiving this phone call. And we always determine, thanks to the geolocation of her phone, that in fact, she only arrives at her mother's house at almost 2:40 p.m. and not 2:20 p.m. While she was at her mother's house, Anita would have pretended to receive a phone call. No, we don't know if it was a message, if it was a wake-up call. Anita Varnaro would have listened. She would have put her phone in her ear to be very exact. And by hanging up, she would have said, someone called, something happened with Marie, I have to go. What is horrible today is to say that, when all this is happening, she knows that her daughter is dead. She knows it. It's a shock for us, because it's very rare, an infanticide like that, so right away we go to, wow, it's not possible, it's too abject, it's not possible. No, a mother can't kill her daughter. It's February 20th, 2014, 3 days after Marie's murder. In the early morning, the Versailles police go to her mother's house, Anita, to arrest her. We arrive and she's not even surprised. We arrive at 6 in the morning, hello, judicial police, criminal brigade, etc. We told her that we had placed her in custody. Stephanie Decatel, police chief at the criminal brigade of Versailles. She was very docile, she didn't rebel at all. On the other hand, her companion asks her, what are you doing here? Why are you coming? It's her daughter who's dead, she's a victim. And now he understands that it's not true. Very quickly, the policeman discovers in the bathroom an overwhelming element for the suspect. A tablet of medication. The same sleeping pill that Marie had been drugged with before being killed. We find the famous molecule of zolpidem, Anita's companion, who sees that I block on this box. So I say, excuse me, sir, I'm going to take this. Anita Varnaro is then taken to the premises of the Versailles Judicial Police. She's crying over her daughter's death. She thinks we're being mean to her. She tells us several times, but I understood that it had to be me anyway, and that you thought it was me. Well, yes, we think it's you, because it's you. The custody begins. Immediately, the victim's mother is questioned about the extent of her time on the day of the murder. She tells the investigators that she slept at her companion's house the night before, in the middle of the night. that she's going to do the cleaning in the morning, and then that she's going to go to Mancy, but that she's not going to go upstairs to see her daughter upstairs. Then she's going to go back to her house, and then around 2 p.m. she's going to go to her mother's house to do the laundry. But the police know that Anita is lying, and they compare her to the video surveillance images from the tobacco office. I'm a little sad, but the purchase of this prepaid card in this tobacco factory in Mellon, which is really right next door, why didn't she tell us about it? It's still important, isn't it? Nothing? No, but she didn't think it was important. She made up the fact that she had actually bought the card for her daughter, but that she could have lost the card that could have been recovered by someone who happened to be the author of Marie's murder. Completely ridiculous explanations. So your theory is that you lost this telephone number that was found by the killer of your daughter, who had your number and who called you in the middle of nowhere, in an area where you are right now. Anita's explanations are confusing, and the stakes are tightening around her. The commandant then questions her about the origin of the sleeping pill found in her companion's house the very morning. But the mother of the family answers everything. In fact, she says she bought them for her. 3 weeks before Marie's death, her mother goes to the pharmacy she goes to regularly and asks for 2 boxes of sleeping pills without having the corresponding order. Normally, these sleeping pills are prescribed on an order. But the pharmacist, quite well aware of Anita Warnero and her companion, agrees to provide her with 2 boxes of sleeping pills without an order. It's a purchase that leaves no trace. There is no order. If there is no vital card that is used, she will buy these medicines from hand to hand. She will say that it is for her personal consumption. Because she has problems with menopause, which causes her sleep problems, etc. And for that, she thinks she would need sleeping pills to spend real nights. The hours go by and Anita continues to claim her innocence. For the investigators, there is an urgency to obtain confessions before the custody ends. Michael Reinhardt then decides to play everything for everything. Alone, in front of the suspect, he tries to move her by reminding her that Marie should have celebrated her 18th birthday on that day. I said to her, "Do you know what day it is today?" She said yes. It's Marie's birthday. She's in custody at the time we're talking about all this. I said, "But just for her, you have to tell me now. You have to tell me something. If there's something to tell me, it's now or never, actually. It's now that I have to say that. For her, out of respect." She opens up a little bit, little by little. And at the end, she has this incredible sentence where she says, "I'm a monster. Open the window. I want to jump." I said to myself, wow. In my head, I said to myself, now she's going to confess. And then I said to her, "Okay, but you're not a monster, but I want to know why." And then she closed herself. Then I said to myself, it's her. While Anita Warnero seemed about to make a confession, she finally closed herself. At the end of her confession, Anita Warnero is presented before the judge of instruction at the Mellon Tribunal. Despite the absence of confession, she is put on trial for the murder of her daughter. So it's true that in this case, we have a number of clues. Some confusing, surprising, others more fable, without any doubt. But we never had a mobile phone. That is to say, we have an infanticide and no mobile phone to put in front. And that, it's still very disturbing. But then, for what reason would Anita have fallen into this murderous spiral? And what could be the motive of the crime? The police will try to understand, by themselves, without Anita's help, why she would have killed her daughter. And there are several hypotheses. Maybe she would have tried to kill her because her daughter would have threatened her mother to reveal that her mother was affected by AIDS. The seropositivity of Anita Warner was learned by herself. It was she who told us in the statements. Anita explains to us that she has had HIV for many years. She knows it was before the birth of Marie. Marie is seronegative. In Anita's entourage, no one was aware of her seropositivity. The police then issue a hypothesis. What if Marie had recently discovered her mother's secret? Would Marie have told her mother to give her money to reveal to her companion that she was seropositive? Was Marie a hindrance in Anita Warner's new life? Anita said it was the end of the beans. It was the end of her nice, cool life with her companion. And maybe she said, "No, you're not going to cut me off." For me, it's my intimate conviction. According to Marie's relatives, there is a second hypothesis that would explain why Anita would have killed her daughter. The second scenario is that Marie would have taken steps to find her father. However, Anita has always opposed that Marie had relations with her father. Mohammed, an old friend, remembers that Marie often talked to him about her desire to find her biological father. What made her sad was not knowing her father. She also said to me, "I want to know him. I want to know if I have brothers and sisters." That's what bothered her a bit. That's what she was looking for. That's what she was missing. According to Mohammed, the teenager was facing a size obstacle in her investigations. There was an opposition on the mother's side who didn't want her to meet her father so that she wouldn't go to the end of her investigations. It really upsets her mother. It's something that her mother doesn't accept. She doesn't want that. That's her redemption. Against her mother's opinion, Marie seemed determined to do everything to find this man. It was one of the things she wanted to accomplish, if we can say that, was to find her father. So that was really something we couldn't take away from her mind. She had tried to take administrative steps, but she had stumbled upon the fact that she was a minor. Maybe Anita killed her daughter a few days before she was 18 to prevent her from finding her father. I can't imagine that it was for that reason today Marie is no longer there. You don't kill your daughter, supposedly well loved, which is true, for a story of disloyalty, of finding her father. I don't feel like it's a sufficient element to explain such an act. As for the fact that Marie could have revealed her mother's seropositivity, I don't believe it either. So why would Anita have taken it from her daughter? How to explain Marie's murder? Everyone now hopes that the truth will burst during the trial. Wednesday, January 4th, 2017 at the Mellon Tribunal. Today is the beginning of Anita Varnero's trial. Almost 3 years after the murder, the victims' relatives finally hope to get the answers to their questions. They absolutely wanted to know why. It's mostly the why. And even if we were given evidence that is coherent, that is solid, etc., there is still a part of me that says, no, that's not it. But hey, the trial was still to try to have a beginning of an answer. Do we know why she did that? Even if the reasons will never justify the acts, we want to know why there is no mystery about that. If it's her who gives a reason. I wouldn't say that my mind will be calmer, but on the one hand, we will have a motive. While everyone hopes to get explanations from Anita, her arrival in the box creates amazement. After 3 years in prison, the victim's mother is unrecognizable. They see an extremely experienced woman, not to say dilapidated, negligibly dressed. We feel that she made no effort to appear, which reinforces the somewhat dark side of the character. She looks so tired, she is very tired, she has white hair. I see that it is her, but it still seems to be a different person. Called to the bar, the accused continues to claim her innocence. She swears she did not kill her daughter. When I hear Anita claiming her innocence, she is screaming for truth. She really continued until the end to say that she was innocent. There is inevitably a part of me who wants to believe her, because, once again, it's so staggering that I want to believe her when she says I'm innocent, it's not me. She was not to the point that I can say today that I believe in that the mother can kill Marie. Because the people who do that, they have no heart, and from what I know about Marie's mother, they were envious of our mother and her child. Anita Warnero's lawyers, who did not want to answer our questions, did everything they could to obtain the acquittal of their client, even if it meant questioning the investigations carried out. The defense lawyers did what they could. They called private experts on the phone to try to cast doubt, to sow doubt in the minds of the jurors, to try to prove that no, we do not really have the proof that it is necessarily this telephone card that made this call on Anita's cell phone. Despite the absence of confession, the facts speak for themselves and weaken Anita Warnero's defense. It's rare to have so many overwhelming elements against someone in a murder case. Really, she checked all the boxes of the bad killer. Frankly, there is the video, there is the geolocation of the phone, everything is there for her to be really stuck herself. Because, on the contrary, if it's not Anita, who can want to kill an almost 18-year-old girl who hurt no one, who had no vice, no addiction? On the contrary, if it's not her, who is it? At the end of 4 days of trial, Anita Warnero is sentenced for the murder of her daughter to 20 years of criminal reclusion. When Anita Warnero is sentenced to 20 years of criminal reclusion, she has no real reaction. Those who will react the most, in the end, it will be her family. It is they who will have an epidemic reaction of defense, not her. I don't want to believe it because, well, her mother, she is as she is, but, well, until childhood. Once again, it's mostly incomprehension, actually. The verdict will be confirmed 2 years later during the trial in the name of Anita Warnero. Although a judicial truth is now established, many are those who remain marked by this case. We know it's Anita Warnero. Anyway, she was sentenced twice to heavy sentences. But in fact, I think the truth is that she herself will never forgive what she did. It's the original crime, let's say, to kill your child. It's one of the most terrible crimes, the intrafamilial crimes. So it's not that surprising that there is no confession. It can end. It's exactly on the last time I saw her. I mean, we held each other at the end of the war. Since the murder of their friend, Sylvain, Mohammed and Clemens have become adults. But they never forgot Marie. We were 18 years old, the age of the majority, the age of flight, the age of freedom. And suddenly someone leaves, very abruptly, our best friend. They think about her birthday, they think about who she was, we think about. They think about it night and day. You have to leave time to time, as they say, and suffer in silence. Often when I think of Marie, it's more in a nostalgic way. I remember the moments we spent together, moments of laughter, moments a little more careful,